G'day everyone. So we're going to have a little bit of a chat today just about Matthew 1. We've kicked off Matthew series and we've done a genealogy to start off. So I guess we want to get into the space of thinking about our hearts, what this means for our walk in discipleship, and we've been chatting about that already.
Yeah.
So what does a genealogy have to do with our walk with Jesus?
It's a great question. I know when we were spending some time on the weekends, there were a lot of faces that were just not super happy to be reading a list of names. I think genealogy is really cool. There's a whole bunch of stuff in them that's more than just a bunch of names. I find it really interesting how there's 4 people in particular that are included in the genealogy that you wouldn't ordinarily expect to see there. And that just makes my brain, I scratch my brain and go, man, that's curious. Why are these people included? And there's cool stories about all of them, but I'm really interested to see why we, why there's people included. What's the point of a Tamar, and what's the point of a Rahab, Uriah's wife. Like even that, there's like a barb in there that I just go, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Why is Matthew including this information here? And yeah, so I just think there's some really interesting things there. But what struck me about that is the fact that we're included in God's family not because we're like the best of the best. We're kind of included in this way that we're included in spite of ourselves, not because of ourselves. And so when I feel down and feel like I'm not worthy of being in God's kingdom, I look to Matthew 1 and I go, man, there's a whole bunch of people included here that they're not the A team, they're not even the B team. They're just kind of included only because of God's grace, which I find that encouraging because I go, well, yeah, sometimes I think I'm included because I'm awesome, but realistically, I'm not included because I'm awesome. I'm included because God's awesome, and He actually does all the work to include me. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of it's a corrective to my personality, but it's also an encouragement when I'm feeling down to go. It's got nothing to do with me and everything to do with God. Which spurs me on, I reckon.
It's like grace.
Yeah, it's God's grace to us. Yeah. And enables us to be included even when we don't deserve it. And yeah, that's a message that I need to hear at the moment, and I think that's really helpful for me. What about you? What did you get out of the passage on Sunday?
Yeah, sitting with the I love the grace piece and how that connects with the story of God's faithfulness over generations. Love that framing of kind of promise fulfillment. And that sense, as you're looking at the list, which I guess aren't just names, but now stories of people, like real life stories of people that we read through the scripture and we see their experience of God, and no doubt sometimes their frustration at inhabiting a place where God's promises haven't come alive for them. But in a sense, as you move through the genealogy, you're awakened to that bigger reality of what you said, God's unfolding purposes and plans. And you just can't help. So for me, can't help but sort of put yourself in that place of waiting. Like we also inhabit a time and space where we've got God's promises and we've got Christ, but in so many seasons of our life where we're in that strange place where it seems like what faith means right now is to wait on God. And we have these examples of those who did that. And I think there's a like in a sense a spiritual discipline of waiting. Like it's a active posture. It's actually not a passive posture. I think waiting and the call to faith sort of go hand in hand as this posture to God that can both cry out in the mess and like give voice to our disappointment or our questions or our confusion about our reality, but at the same time to grasp for that promised hope that is before us. There's a funny space that sort of puts us in. We're waiting, both pulls in sorrow and joy like at the same time. We can draw on the times God's been good to us, and like I lean into that, but at the same time sit with the space of, oh, this isn't what I expected my life to be, or things aren't turning out right now how I thought. So I find that challenges my heart. Everything about life today does, like you said, position us to expect things to happen here and now. And as I look at my heart, that's me. Like every time I kind of trace back my disappointment or discontent or my worried thoughts, they all come back to some place of, oh, I thought it would turn out like this.
Yeah.
And as soon as I say that, I go, well, the call to faith is so different. So, yeah, I think that's what sort of hit me, that sense of waiting. And
It's interesting because the list of names is basically a whole bunch of people that got promised big stuff but died before they were fulfilled. So, I mean, I got reminded again that when God makes a promise, his timeline is not necessarily our timeline. And so all these people, big promises, they're all in the grave before they see them fulfilled. And so Matthew's helpfully actually tying us to God's timeline, not our timeline. And saying all of these people's promises have been fulfilled, even if their experience in life is one of disappointment, or whether they do have to keep waiting and waiting and waiting. So I find that tremendously encouraging. Let's expect to wait on God. Anything else that was interesting to you?
That's sort of the take home, isn't it? Yeah,
I think I mean, we're all about the list of names. I think promises as well. There's something really impressive about God's promises. I always love, verse 1, you've got David and you've got Abraham, and you always expect, like, I don't know, I'm an ordered person, so I like it to be chronological. When David gets named first before Abraham, you go, man, that's big. Why is that going on there? You've got his promises that kind of go together. And you've got David's promises, Abraham's promises that are tied together in Jesus.
Yeah, that's beautiful because, like, David meshes with that figure who didn't deserve, he didn't deserve the king in the sense, and his sin surely warrants like forfeiture of his privileges. And yet his name there does like sing your song of grace. And then I think Abraham back there as well sort of highlights the sense of waiting. Like Hebrews captures that line about all those people who lived by faith. They didn't see the promises come to fruition in their time, but faith is. So even the highlighting of Abraham and David there sort of brings together the grace of God and the call to faith.
And that's interesting because there's no, like, David doesn't uphold the promises. The promises aren't dependent on David. He forfeited his rights to be able to be in that space if he was a participant in actually upholding the promise. But because it's God upholding the promise, not him, the promise is fulfilled. And similarly to Abraham, like, how many times did he tell his wife was his sister? Like, twice, and then the next generation does it. So it's like a whole family system. And when he is, I mean, he's a faithful guy, don't get me wrong, but when he is not perfectly faithful, that doesn't actually nullify God's faithfulness to him. So that's another cool reminder within Matthew 1. And I mean, I always like to nail up front what my main point is. It's just really interesting how in Matthew 17 he makes us wait all the way through till verse 16 before he goes, Jesus, the Messiah. And kind of unfold. He keeps us on the hook as we go through.
I sit with that, and that just sort of like the question that percolates for both of those, grace and waiting, is like, what's my relationship right now to God in His grace? Like, beyond just the words and what they mean as a Christian, but like right now, where are the spaces in my heart that are resistant to grace, actually? And the same thing for like, what's my relationship right now to that posture of waiting and the call to faith, and where in my heart is sort of this impatience with God or with people in my life and my world, and that expectancy that things should happen the way I want. That's what I sort of sit with now as we're fleshing that out. Yeah.
So later in the week when you go to growth group, is there anything that you kind of go, man, I actually want to think through this with the people in my group? Is there any questions that are kind of sitting on your heart that you want to drill deeper?
Probably those two.
Yep.
like as in what encourages my heart is like I need to hear the stories of others who are like similarly, engaged in this space. In a funny way, like as you talk about the struggle of grace, perhaps it sort of puts a light on my struggle of waiting. I hear God working in your heart to make known His grace, and that, like, as I hear about that, it actually just reminds me again, like, I'm seeing God do that work in you. I'm therefore expecting the same in my life, and so like, give me eyes to see that.
Yeah.
It just helps my prayerfulness and openness to what God might be doing.
Yeah.
The shared story together, even if our experiences are different. That's kind of what I look forward to when we meet together.
Yeah, good. I reckon my temptation is always just to jump into the passage and kind of go, let's get stuck into where these stories actually go, and let's get stuck into the nuts and bolts of learning more about these individual characters and what they're doing and how they fit into God's
the
picture.
Beautiful biblical theology that comes together. Yeah.
And I think my temptation is really to hold the passage at arm's length rather than thinking, how am I the recipient of this radical grace? How is it that God has actually included me in His story? I'm part of His genealogy now, even in spite of who I am. And so what does it actually look like for me to live as someone who is saved by this radical grace and welcomed in, not because I'm upholding the covenant, but because God is the one who is faithfully bringing us through. So I think my temptation is just to keep it up in the head. And I want to just fight that temptation. So try and make sure we're actually thinking about what it means, not just to think stuff about God, to actually live our lives well for His glory.
We should almost have some like white space in our books as we're looking at the genealogy to kind of go put your name there. What's that like for you to see your name there? Like Davo, son of God, Josiah, brother of Jesus. That's sort of the space that we now go. Like we're brought into that picture as well, and that story as well, and that unfolding story, and all of us in our church are now jammed in there together. Like, what will be the next names that come?
Even that's a helpful reminder. Like we're the present generation, right? We think the world revolves around us, and it doesn't. There will be a next generation, just as there was a past generation. And so, keeping in mind, we're not the end of the story. We're part of the story, and so that's that's a helpful reminder. Where are we going? Where's God taking us as a body, and how do we pass on to the next generation what God has passed on to us from previous generations. Beautiful. All right, look forward to go through it. We'll have a crack at that, and we'll see what happens.
Sounds great.